When we visited the UNESCO Palace to see the collection for the first time, I wouldn't say that I was shocked, but really sad to see the extent of the damages, the neglect and the absence of care for this collection. More than 1,000 paintings were squeezed into shelves that were much too tight. And we could only guess the colors of the paintings because they were covered by thick layers of dust, dirt and mold, sadly. There were so many paintings in poor conditions. Paintings by famous artists as Arif El-Rais or Helen El-Khal that were torn or showed paint losses and flaking paint layers. There are a lot of sculptures that were broken or sculptures made of metal that showed rust. But in the same time, this first visit meant the beginning of our restoration project. We immediately felt that we need to save and preserve this collection for the future. And today we are restoring over 600 paintings that will be hopefully shown in the future to the public.
BeMA, Beirut Museum of Art, is a non-profit organization registered in Lebanon, a new cultural platform highlighting modern and contemporary art from Lebanon and from the region. The idea to found the museum came from our strong belief in creating positive social change through establishing a unique cultural space for dialogue.
BeMA will include the unique modern and contemporary art collection of the Ministry of Culture. The collection is a true national treasure. It narrates the history and evolution of the Lebanese Republic.
It all started in 1954 when the Ministry of Education decided to hire the LAAPS, which stands for the Lebanese Artists Association for Painters and Sculptors, to organize events whereby artists would present their works and they would acquire works from these exhibitions. This lasted until 1975, until obviously the war. During the war, the acquisitions were less frequent and the policies were not as organized. In 1993, the Ministry of Culture was officially instated and they took over the collection as well as the acquisition policy by having an annual budget that they would spend on acquisitions depending on what the artist presented to them. Today, the collection comprises 3,000 pieces by 500 Lebanese artists. However, the BeMA selection is around 600 works by 140 artists.
BeMA's main raison d'etre is that they respond to a need. For example, the restoration program, the collection of the Ministry of Culture needed to be restored, preserved, and studied and reintroduced to a wider public. When I visited the lab, the BeMA Restoration Lab, I was impressed that they did actually implement BeMA's mission organically. They had created an inclusive community where international and local students can have a cultural exchange. They created a place where experts can offer their knowledge and where artists and researchers were involved in the process in studying the collection and reshaping it.
We had an inventory and we had a brief assessment of the entire collection. Based on that, we started our restoration works and developed our strategy. We started to evacuate first the most important artworks, but soon realized that they already have been restored in the past and presented only minor damages. So we started to work on paintings that presented more severe damages as tears, holes, losses of paint layers. And in the same time, we started to work on the works on paper. In 2019, the Ministry of Culture finished the restoration of its storage, and we were able to relocate the entire collection to its new premises. Before that, we were cleaning the entire collection during 2 months in order to remove all the dust that was present on the paintings. So we were able to collect nearly 1/2 kilo of dust from the collection. Now we are able to tackle more complex questions as how to deal with paintings that present a lot of paint losses, or how to deal with paintings that were restored in the past and to which extent, for example, they should be de-restored.
So this collection is unique in many ways. First of all, it's a comprehensive collection that includes the major Lebanese artists and their works from the 1950s until the 1990s. Secondly, and what's very interesting, is that it includes quite a few lesser-known artists that are yet to be discovered by both the public and researchers. And finally, and most importantly, this collection is unique because it's in fact a national treasure as well as a national heritage.
We did not acquire the collection. The collection is on indefinite loan. The loan agreement was signed with the Ministry of Culture, Mr. Roni Areji, who was open and very supportive of the idea. Today, the collection is online through a digital platform created in collaboration with Rice University in Houston. This will make the collection accessible to historians and curators working on BeMA's collection research.
BeMA's restoration project is a perfect example of the public and private cooperation and how an extraordinary impact it can have for the arts and culture of Lebanon. This project is also about solidarity and about resilience. After Lebanon had had so many crises and thinking about the economical crisis, the pandemic, the social crisis, the explosion of 2020, and nothing has stopped this restoration project. So it is really about an incredible celebration of the resilience of so many people and such an extraordinary team working on such an important project for the future.
The explosion in 2020 was devastating. Nevertheless, we were lucky because the collection of the Ministry of Culture was not that much damaged. Only some paintings that were on display at the Sarai had suffered some damages. And we had the opportunity to bring them to our workshop and to restore them. Most of these artworks that were damaged during the explosion presented tears and holes. And this is why we consulted Petra Demerot from the Conservation Institute from Cologne to help us to save these torn artworks. She gave an online tear mending workshop for Lebanese restorers who were working on these paintings, and we also had a possibility to invite some master students from Cologne and from Switzerland to help us with the restoration of these damaged paintings. This was thanks to a grant from the Lee Beirut initiative from UNESCO.
Hallo Petra, danke, dass du dir Zeit genommen hast. Meine erste Frage betrifft die Stabilität des Klebstoffes, da wir hier ja doch etwas besondere Bedingungen haben, weil das Klima feuchter und auch wärmer ist als in Deutschland, in Mitteleuropa. Und da hätten wir einfach gerne gefragt, ob du da noch wie deine Meinung dazu ist, zu der Langzeitstabilität von dem Klebstoff, den wir verwenden.
Ja, die Bedingungen in Beirut sind natürlich extrem mit den hohen Feuchtigkeitsschwankungen und den enormen Temperaturschwankungen. Und bis heute gibt es keine Untersuchungen dazu, wie sich diese Klebstoffe bei solchen Extremklimata verhalten werden. Und daher können wir keine ganz klaren Prognosen treffen. Was wir aber sagen können, ist, dass der Klebstoff als solcher ausgesprochen alterungsbeständig ist und auch insgesamt sehr gute Eigenschaften hat, sodass wir selbst jetzt für Beirut, für den Libanon sagen können, dass es ein geeigneter Klebstoff ist und es uns auch an Alternativen letztendlich ein Stück weit mangelt.
We are really looking forward to intensify this kind of collaborations, also because we want to have support to train Lebanese students in the field of conservation and restoration.
After the explosion in August 2020, we contacted through Hala Shuker, a number of staff at BeMA's, and that's really how the relationship developed. Our main focus was to empower the conservators already present in Beirut and to make them feel supported. And from that, I felt that the workshop was less didactic and more collaborative. And that would definitely be the nature of any future workshops, I think, because I do have 30 years experience in a museum. Melissa has a lot of experience in both the commercial field and the museum world. However, we do need to become more familiar with the conditions you have working on the ground in Beirut. And we do need to think very carefully about what the next workshop should be and what would be the most useful type of information to impart to the conservators now that they're very much a year and a half on from the disaster, and they'll probably be starting to consider not just emergency conservation treatment, but more longer term treatments, having stabilized a lot of the objects.
Being in Beirut or the Lebanon, materials are one of the most difficult things that you have. Everything needs to be flown in, and there's a lot of very particular materials that we use in conservation. So one thing we've been looking at a lot is how to find local materials that work as well as materials that are maybe found in Europe, and how to replace them. And I think that's a sort of area that's we're going to develop further and further.
Since 2019, the situation in Lebanon is really unstable. We are facing a lot of power cuts, and we have to adapt our working hours to the rhythm of the power cuts, which is really not ideal. Nevertheless, we hope that all these problems are only temporary.
Sometimes I use titles of movies, books, sayings, and I adapt them to my paintings, which is the case with this painting. I was inspired by the Italian movie Una giornata particolare, which is a special day in English, and I turned it into an ordinary day. I always knew that a big part of the art collection of the Ministry of Culture was in bad shape, so I'm really happy that now finally they're being restored with BeMA's. My painting is part of the collection of the Ministry of Culture. It's been selected by BeMA's to be part of the future museum.
What will differentiate BeMA's from other museums is first the location. BeMA's is housed in one of the major and most respected education and research institutions in the country, Université Saint-Joseph. The site stands on what was called the Green Line, which divided the city along sectarian lines during the war. The Conservation Lab. BeMA's is developing a state-of-the-art facility for the conservation, restoration, and analysis of the artworks. This is done in partnership with Université Saint-Joseph and with other international specialized institutions. The program offers internships, it offers training, and it will offer diplomas.
The restoration lab will be at the heart of the project. It will be an important element of the architecture, and visitors can see it and can understand the process, and we can keep the history of the collection.
And last but not least, the architecture. The architect is focusing on exactly what a 21st century museum should be, which is a museum as a community and not as a temple. Art will spill out from the balcony spaces on the street, and people will be able to see and engage with the artworks.
So architecturally, the inspiration is really the city, everything from the Art Deco buildings that were really the beginning of modernism in Beirut, where you have a very simple concrete kind of maison domino style, and then the ornate facade, very deep verandas, balconies, really negotiating both inside and outside, but also expressing something about the city in this sort of very democratic way that was enabled by the technology of concrete. And so these were sort of the initial ideas architecturally to mirror these questions of modernity through architecture. But it was also a sort of reflection on where museums are today and where they should go to be more open, more accessible, more offering the potential for engagement with different communities to do more than just be a black box or a white box for art that is just a kind of elitist. It's evolved, especially after 2020 and the current situation and the difficulties. It's really, its mission has been refocused, and this is again working with this amazing team to really highlight this education component, to really highlight the conservation component. So these are now very sort of important on the second floor. There's really and then to really highlight the permanent collection.
Once the museum opens and the collection is finally showcased, it will not only be a history about the art in Lebanon, but it will also be a history about Lebanon. And I'm hoping that the communities, local and international, will, once they visit this collection, feel that sense of national pride and feel the sense of education and potential education that can come out of it. For example, I'm hoping that schools can start doing programs whereby instead of teaching the students to copy the work or be inspired of the works by Matisse, they can actually look at the works of Shafi Aboud or Hussein Mahdi or Etel Adnan, and really take pride of this collection that really represents our identity and our heritage.
In addition to housing modern and contemporary works, BeMA will engage with diverse communities and host cultural and educational programs in the service of building a committed civil society. BeMA will bring together different narratives, foster conversation in connection with cultural organizations and partners across the region and globally.
Fundraising has been very, very difficult in the present circumstances. Art and culture are really the expression of our nation's soul, and they attest to the richness of its diversity. BeMA offers a beacon of hope and possibility in a world driven with conflict and despair. We should never give up on culture, we should never give up on education, and we should never give up on Lebanon.